Don't forget to like the video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to stay updated with our latest stories. It was one of those ordinary afternoons, the kind where nothing seemed to be happening, and yet, somehow, everything felt right in its own quiet way. The sun was dipping low in the sky, casting soft orange light across my kitchen. I was in the middle of making tea when the doorbell rang, a sharp contrast to the peaceful stillness of the moment. I wasn't expecting anyone, and for a second I thought I might ignore it. After all, it was just the usual delivery people or perhaps a neighbor needing something trivial. But I didn't ignore it. Instead, I walked over to the door, wiping my hands on the apron I was wearing, and opened it to find him standing there. Ethan, my 18-year-old neighbor. Now, Ethan wasn't just any teenager. He wasn't the loud, brash type that seemed to be everywhere these days. He was different. He had a quiet demeanor, always polite, always with that kind smile. I'd known him for years. His family moved in when he was just a kid, and over time, we developed a sort of casual acquaintance. He'd wave at me from across the street, help me carry in groceries if he happened to be passing by, and once or twice, he'd chat with me while I was gardening. But that was all. I'd always appreciated his respect for boundaries, his maturity for someone so young, and the way he made me feel like I wasn't alone in my own quiet world. That afternoon, though, something was different about him. The usual teenage swagger wasn't there. Instead, he looked a little unsure, almost hesitant. "Hey, Mrs. Lewis," he said, his voice softer than I remembered, a bit uneasy. "I was wondering if you happen to have any sugar. I ran out, and I'm in the middle of baking." I smiled, a bit taken aback by the request. It wasn't anything extravagant, and I'd lent him sugar before, but there was something in the way he said it, something that made me pause. Maybe it was the subtle nervousness in his voice, or perhaps the way he stood a little too close, as though waiting for something. "Of course," I said, stepping aside. "Come in." He hesitated just for a moment before stepping into the warmth of my home, a place he'd been in countless times over the years, but never with this feeling in the air. I led him to the kitchen, where the smell of tea was starting to mix with the lingering scent of baked bread. I reached up into the cabinet for the sugar, and I could feel his eyes following me, just for a second, and then quickly looking away. I handed him the small jar, and when our fingers brushed, I felt a jolt of something I couldn't quite place. "Thanks," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. He stood there for a moment, looking down at the jar in his hands, before he added, "You know, I've been thinking about something." I turned back to face him, unsure of where this conversation was going. "What's on your mind, Ethan?" He shifted uncomfortably. "It's kind of silly, really, but I trust you, Mrs. Lewis. I guess I just don't know who else to talk to." I could see his eyes looking for something, maybe understanding, maybe reassurance, and I was struck by how mature his gaze was, despite his youth. It was the kind of look that made me realize he wasn't the same kid I used to watch ride his bike up and down the street anymore. There was something deeper there now, something that seemed to connect with me in a way I hadn't anticipated. "You can talk to me about anything," I said softly, my heart beginning to race, though I didn't understand why. Maybe it was just the way he looked at me, or perhaps the vulnerability in his voice that made me feel like I needed to protect him, to listen with a depth I hadn't felt before. He exhaled, a little nervous laugh escaping his lips. I don't know if I should, but..." He trailed off for a moment before looking me straight in the eyes. "It's just that, well, there's this girl, and I'm not sure how to, talk to her. I don't want to mess it up, you know." I felt a wave of relief flood over me, though I wasn't sure why. "You like someone, huh?" I said, smiling warmly. He nodded, his expression softening. Yeah, it's just, I don't know. I can't seem to get the words right. And I thought maybe you could give me some advice. Something inside me stirred, an odd mix of empathy and curiosity. Here was this young man, standing in my kitchen, asking for help with something so personal. And yet it felt like more than that. I found myself drawn to the way he was looking at me, as if seeking validation, a quiet connection. I cleared my throat, suddenly aware of how still the room had become. Well, I began, taking a slow breath, I can tell you one thing. Be honest with her. If you really like her, you've got to show her that you care. But don't be afraid to be yourself. That's the most important thing. His eyes lit up a little, as though my words meant more to him than I realized. Thanks, he said, his voice tinged with gratitude. That really helps. And yet, even as I gave him my advice, there was a part of me that felt strangely unsettled. Why did it feel like this conversation was more than just about a crush? Why did I feel like there was something else in the air, something unspoken between us? As he turned to leave, holding the jar of sugar like it was something more than just a simple favor, I felt a lingering tension in the air. Something had shifted, but I couldn't quite put my finger on it. I watched him walk out the door, my mind racing. I didn't know what was going to happen next, but I felt an inexplicable pull toward him, something that would grow with every moment we spent together. Something that I couldn't ignore, no matter how hard I tried. The next few days passed in a blur, each moment feeling both ordinary and strange at the same time. My daily routine didn't change much, but the atmosphere in my home felt different, charged, as though something unspoken lingered in the air, just beyond reach. I found myself thinking about Ethan more than I expected, more than I wanted to admit. The way his eyes met mine, the way his voice trembled slightly when he asked for advice, it had stayed with me. Each time I walked past my kitchen, I remembered how he had stood there, so close, yet so distant. The subtle warmth of his presence seemed to linger in my mind long after he had left. I tried to shake the thoughts off. He was just a neighbor, just a kid. He was asking for advice on girls, for heaven's sake. It was innocent. But still, there was something about the way he trusted me, the way he seemed to look at me not just as a neighbor, but as someone with experience, someone who might understand the deeper feelings he couldn't quite express. It wasn't until a few days later that the next encounter happened. It was a late afternoon, and I was sitting by the window, a cup of tea in hand, watching the world go by as the evening light began to fade. The house was quiet, almost too quiet. That's when I heard a light knock on the door. I wasn't expecting anyone, so my heart skipped a beat. When I opened it, I found Ethan standing there again, his hands nervously fidgeting at his sides. "I, Mrs. Lewis," he said, his voice a little unsure, like he wasn't entirely sure how to begin this time. I'm sorry to bother you again, but I wanted to ask you something else." I stepped aside, inviting him in. This wasn't unusual for him. He'd been in and out of my house countless times, but this time felt different. He was standing a little closer, his shoulders a little more rigid, and there was an intensity in his eyes that I couldn't ignore. "What's on your mind?" I asked, trying to sound casual, though my heart was racing for some reason I couldn't quite place. He hesitated, his lips pressed into a thin line as if he were gathering courage. "I don't really know how to say this, but there's something I've been wanting to tell you," he said, the words slow but deliberate, as though he were testing each one for weight. I raised an eyebrow. "You know you can tell me anything, Ethan. What's going on?" His gaze dropped to the floor for a moment, and I could see the flush of pink creeping up his neck. He took a breath and then looked back at me, his eyes wide and vulnerable. "It's about how I've been feeling. About You. The words hit me harder than I expected. For a second, my mind went blank, trying to process what he had just said. He was looking at me with a mixture of uncertainty and something deeper, something that felt personal, raw, and unfamiliar. I swallowed, my throat dry. What do you mean, Ethan? He shuffled his feet a little, clearly uncomfortable, but not backing down. I don't know how to explain it, but I've been thinking about you a lot. I don't want to make things awkward or weird, but I wanted to tell you. I don't know why, but I trust you, Mrs. Lewis. You've always been so kind to me, and I feel like I can talk to you. And I've been feeling this way for a while now. I felt my heart race as I tried to steady myself. The room seemed to shrink around me as his words echoed in my ears. This wasn't how I had expected this to go. A part of me wanted to laugh it off, to tell him it was just a passing thought, a youthful crush, and that it would fade. But another part of me couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more beneath the surface. I took a slow breath, trying to find the right words. Ethan. I began, my voice softer than I intended. I know it's probably hard to understand, but I'm much older than you. You're still figuring things out, and I don't want you to think this means something it doesn't. He nodded, but I could see the hurt flash in his eyes, quickly hidden behind that familiar mask of maturity. I know, he said quietly. I wasn't expecting anything. I just needed to say it. I've been carrying this around for a while, and I don't want it to change anything between us. I swallowed hard, the weight of his words pressing against my chest. Part of me wanted to reassure him that nothing would change, that things could go back to the way they were. But another part of me, a deeper, quieter part, was unsettled by how much I understood him, by how much I felt the gravity of his confession. Thank you for telling me, I said softly, looking him in the eye. You're a very brave young man, and I'm honored that you trust me like this. He smiled, a small, bittersweet smile that made my heart ache. I just needed to get it off my chest. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The silence between us felt heavier than it had before, the unspoken tension swirling around us like smoke. Ethan shifted his weight from one foot to the other, then looked at the door as if he was about to leave, but he paused. You're a good person, Mrs. Lewis, he said quietly. You've been there for me in ways no one else has. I'll never forget that. The words were simple, but they struck me harder than I expected. I nodded, feeling the sting of something I couldn't quite explain. Take care of yourself, Ethan, I said, my voice catching a little. And remember, you're not alone in all this. You have people who care about you. He smiled again, and for a moment the world seemed to shift. Something between us had changed, though neither of us knew what it was, not yet. He turned and walked out the door, leaving me standing there, my hands trembling slightly, my heart racing. The weight of the moment lingered long after he was gone. It was more than just a confession. It was an invitation to something deeper, something unexpected. And though I tried to push the thought away, I couldn't help but wonder what would come next. Would this change everything? Would it change us? The following week was filled with an eerie quietness. Ethan and I exchanged small pleasantries when our paths crossed. Nothing more, nothing less. He was polite but distant, and I, too, kept a careful distance. I had expected things to feel awkward between us, but I wasn't prepared for how much it weighed on me. His confession lingered in my mind like a shadow, one that couldn't be ignored but wasn't entirely unpleasant either. The thing was, I hadn't realized how much he had changed the dynamic between us. I had known Ethan since he was just a boy, running around the neighborhood with a carefree laugh and a smile that could light up any room. I had watched him grow into a young man, full of uncertainty and potential. But now it was as if something had shifted in the very fabric of our connection. I tried to keep myself busy. There was always something to do around the house. Laundry, dishes, sorting through the ever-growing stack of paperwork. But every time I walked into the kitchen or sat down to watch television, I found myself thinking of him. I could still picture his face, the way his eyes had locked with mine that day, vulnerable and open. I could still hear his voice, barely above a whisper, as he told me how he felt. And each time I thought of it, my heart would skip a beat, and then I'd quickly push the thought away. I needed to move on. He was a young man, just starting to explore the world of relationships and feelings. I couldn't let myself get tangled up in something that wasn't meant for me. But one evening, as the sun set and the golden light filtered through my living room windows, my phone rang. The name on the screen made my heart stop. Ethan. I hesitated for a moment, unsure of why he was calling. The silence between us had been so palpable, and I didn't want to risk undoing the fragile peace we had built since that day. But I knew that avoiding it wouldn't make things any easier. Hello? I answered, my voice unsure, betraying the mix of emotions that churned inside me. Hey, Mrs. Lewis. Ethan's voice crackled through the line, warm and familiar, yet distant. I hope I'm not bothering you. No, not at all, I said quickly, forcing my tone to be casual. What's up? There was a pause on the other end, a hesitation that made my heart race. I could tell he was searching for the right words. I was wondering if I could come over for a bit. I've been thinking about what we talked about, and I just want to. I don't know. I guess I just want to talk more, if that's okay. I felt a flutter of anxiety in my stomach. I knew this conversation was inevitable, but now that it was here, I wasn't sure how to handle it. The last thing I wanted was for things to become more complicated, but at the same time, I didn't want to push him away. Of course, I said, my voice softer than I intended. Come on over. A few minutes later, the knock on the door sounded again. I opened it to find Ethan standing there, looking somewhat anxious but determined. His hands were shoved deep into his pockets, and his posture was stiff, like he was waiting for my reaction. Hey, I said with a smile, stepping aside to let him in. Come on in. He nodded and walked inside, but he didn't sit down right away. He just stood there, like he wasn't sure where to go or how to begin. The silence between us was thick, uncomfortable, yet somehow intimate, as though we both understood the gravity of this moment. I've been thinking a lot about what I said the other day. Ethan started, his voice slightly strained. And I don't know how to explain it. I know I'm young and I shouldn't be feeling this way, but it's like something's changed between us, and I can't ignore it. I know you probably don't feel the same, and I get that. I'm not asking for anything to change, but I just wanted to tell you again, in person, that I really respect you. You've always been there for me, and I don't want that to go away. His words struck me more than I had anticipated. The sincerity in his voice, the way he looked at me, so open and unguarded, made something inside me stir. He wasn't asking for anything beyond understanding, beyond a conversation. But the honesty of his confession made my heart ache, and I couldn't deny that a small part of me longed to say something more, something that might offer him reassurance. I swallowed, my hands trembling slightly. Ethan, I don't want things to be awkward between us, either, I said, my voice softer now. But you have to understand that I care about you, like I've always cared about you. I've watched you grow up, and I've seen how kind and thoughtful you are. You have a big heart, but you're still so young. I can't let myself get involved in something that isn't fair to you. He nodded, his expression a mixture of relief and disappointment. "I get it. I wanted to say it out loud, to tell you how I feel. I know it's a lot to ask." We stood there for a long moment, neither of us quite knowing what to do next. The air between us felt heavy, like a silent promise was hanging there, waiting for us to acknowledge it. I wanted to say more, to tell him that everything would be okay, that we could still be close. But instead, I simply smiled and patted the couch next to me, inviting him to sit down. "You're a good kid, Ethan," I said, my voice breaking the silence. "And I'm proud of you. Always will be." He sat down beside me, a quiet understanding passing between us. Neither of us said anything for a while. But in that silence, I felt something change. It wasn't the end of something. It was the beginning of something new, a deeper connection rooted in respect and honesty. Maybe we didn't have all the answers yet, but we had each other's trust. And that, I realized, was the most important thing. As the evening drew to a close and Ethan stood to leave, he looked at me one last time, his eyes filled with something I couldn't quite name. "Thanks for listening," he said, his voice soft. "I really appreciate it." "Any time," I replied, my heart full. "Take care of yourself, Ethan." He smiled and walked out the door, leaving me alone with my thoughts. For the first time in days, I felt a sense of clarity, a sense of peace. Things were different, yes, but that didn't mean they had to be bad. There was still something beautiful in the way we cared for one another, and that was enough for now. The weeks that followed felt like a delicate balance. Ethan and I had found our rhythm again, a quieter one, but a rhythm nonetheless. We continued our exchanges, brief conversations about the weather, a quick wave when we passed each other on the street, a shared smile over a cup of coffee when he came over to borrow sugar again, though this time it was never quite the same. We both knew that the silence between us now held something deeper, but we had come to accept it. One evening, as the sky grew darker and the wind picked up, I found myself sitting on my porch, the cool air brushing against my skin. The leaves rustled gently in the trees, and I found comfort in the peacefulness of the moment. The past few days had been quiet, too quiet. No unexpected calls, no knocks on the door. Just life moving forward, a little more slowly than usual. I tried to convince myself that it was for the best. Ethan was young, full of potential, with a whole world ahead of him. And I was 45, with experiences behind me, not ahead. There was a reason things hadn't worked out with my own relationships, a reason why I was more comfortable alone. But even as I tried to bury these thoughts, there was a part of me that couldn't quite let go of the connection Ethan and I had shared. Suddenly, I heard the familiar sound of footsteps approaching my porch. I turned and saw him, standing in the doorway. Ethan's face was calm, yet there was something more to him now, something different, something deeper than the boy I had known. "Hey, Mrs. Lewis," he greeted me softly. "Can I sit with you for a minute?" I smiled, my heart skipping just a bit at the sound of my name on his lips. "Of course. Have a seat." He sat beside me, our shoulders nearly touching. There was an odd comfort in the silence that followed. Neither of us spoke for a long while, simply watching the way the night sky changed above us. The stars were clearer tonight, a canvas of twinkling lights that filled the sky with their quiet promise. "I've been thinking a lot," Ethan said after a while, his voice breaking the stillness. "About everything. About what you said, how you made me understand that it wasn't the right time, and how I needed to focus on myself." I turned to face him, nodding slowly. "And have you been focusing on yourself?" I asked gently. He smiled slightly, a little shy. "Yeah, I think I have. I've been taking care of some things, School, my future. But you were right. It wasn't just about what I wanted. I needed to understand what I needed first. And, well, you were a big part of that. I learned a lot from you, from how you treat people, how you handle things. I've started looking at life differently because of you. My heart softened at his words. Ethan had always been a thoughtful young man, but hearing him acknowledge how much our conversations had shaped him, it felt like a gift I didn't